Thank you everyone for joining us for our very first conservation conversations with BirdLife South Africa. We are extremely excited to be able to bring you a webinar series that hopes to bring a little joy to your lockdown and hopefully entertain your Tuesday evenings. I know the panelists have all got their drinks in front of them, and I hope that all of you who still have some alcohol left during this lockdown period have got yours in front of you as well. I'd like to welcome our speaker this evening, Mark Anderson, the CEO of BirdLife South Africa, as well as Jim Lawrence, the Global Marketing Manager for BirdLife International, who will be making a guest appearance during Mark's talk, and another guest appearance from Dr. Chris Lotz, who is the Director of Birding Ecotours. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark to the stage or screen to let him get us going. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you very much, Melissa. And I presume that it's presented as it should be.
Yes, I can see your screen, Mark. Go for it.
Great. Okay, that's good. And before we start, I just need to firstly welcome you all, and it's just so nice to see such good attendance. Really appreciate you giving up your time to be with us this evening. And I also need to thank Melissa, Dr. Melissa Howes-Whitecross, who's been the champion for this series of webinars that we're going to be presenting during lockdown. So she's put a lot of effort into it. Melissa, we really appreciate all your work. Okay, I'm going to be talking a little bit about bird life at work, and particularly how we go about conserving the world's birds. So this is not necessarily about BirdLife South Africa's work only. I will be referring occasionally to BirdLife South Africa's work, but it's about all the work that's done around the globe by this incredible partnership of organizations under BirdLife International. On the slide, you will see that I've also included the RSPB's logo. The RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, is our sister organization in the UK. And I don't think we would manage to do all we do without the RSPB's assistance. They're really an incredible organization, a very large organization, much bigger than us, that provide us with lots and lots of support. On my previous slide, I had our logo, and you will see the catchphrase under that logo, giving conservation wings. And that quite aptly describes what we do. You know, our organization is about bird conservation, as will become evident during my talk. Okay, so this talk is about BirdLife International, and it's a very interesting and unique organization, and one that I'm exceptionally proud to be part of. And BirdLife does a really, really good work, and there's a number of reasons why. Firstly, it's a global organization, and I'll show you in later slides. You'll see there are BirdLife partners across the globe. So because birds are not only nomadic, but also migratory, we have to work together to conserve them. We can't do it in isolation. We've got to work together to ensure that they are conserved. We also use the best ambassadors for nature. Remember the canary in the coal mine story? If the canary falls over, you need to get out of the coal mine very quickly. Birds are big and important ambassadors for nature. If they're there, and if their populations are thriving, generally other biodiversity is also intact. A thing that sets BirdLife apart as well is that it's a scientific organization. Science guides BirdLife's work, and there's a very strong scientific team in the Secretariat in Cambridge, in the regional office in Nairobi, as well as in our offices in South Africa. We also connect the world through what we do, and that is because birds are migratory. They move across the world. So, you know, a bird in South Africa one day could be, you know, further north in Malawi the next. Birds are moving around the globe, and in that way they connect the world. Okay, so this talk is about BirdLife International. And BirdLife cannot do what it does on its own, because there's just a vast planet, a lot needs to be done. But there's an amalgamation, there's a partnership of many organizations, and more than 120 organizations work together to conserve the world's birds. And you will see the logos of those organizations. The logos are all unique, and they reflect the uniqueness of many of the partners across the globe. BirdLife is the largest partnership for nature on planet. And you'll see on that map of the world, all the colored areas are where there is a BirdLife partner. You'll see the Americas, South America and North America, Europe, Africa, parts of Asia, Australasia. They are BirdLife partners. And some of them are very active and very large and making massive contributions to bird conservation in their respective countries. The figures at the bottom, don't worry too much about the detail, but one of them or two of them that are important is, firstly, you'll see bottom left, there's 8,000 staff. BirdLife across the world employs 8,000 staff. That's a massive organization. You'll also see middle BirdLife has 7 million members across the globe. So it's a very, very large organization. And in bottom right, 4 million hectares of nature reserves are protected by the BirdLife partnership. BirdLife International will be 100 years old in 2 years' time, formed in 1922 by somebody called Gilbert Pearson. Well, Gilbert was actually the first president. And I looked at some of the early literature about what he said at that time. And there was a quote, which I think is quite apt and remains apt today. And that says that by united action, we should be able to accomplish more than organizations working individually on combating dangers to BirdLife. That really remains true today. If we work together, we'll be able to achieve a lot. So BirdLife International will be 100 years old soon, and we're planning lots of celebrations to take place in the UK in 2022. BirdLife South Africa is in fact a lot older. BirdLife South Africa was formed back in 1905 as the South African Ornithologists Union, became the Southern African Ornithological Society in 1936, and became a BirdLife partner in 1996. So you'll see the origins of BirdLife South Africa were initially in ornithology, really the study of birds. And that's really what the two organizations, the work they undertook originally. It's only when we became a BirdLife partner in 1996 that the shift was the shift more towards the conservation of birds. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I love birds. I'm very passionate about birds and the environment, and there was literally going to be no other career for me. And from a young age, I was fortunate to spend time in the bush and spend a lot of time, particularly with my grandfather, watching birds and growing attached to them. And there was, as I said, no other option. This is what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. And it's been an absolute honor and privilege for me to spend my working life working with birds. I think people think about me as somebody who's been involved with flamingos, and I have done a bit of work on flamingos, and some of that work continues today by a number of other people and organizations. But my favorite birds are vultures by far. And that's a white-backed vulture. It's a picture I took outside Kimberley, a farm called Dronfield. And we've been doing a lot of work in the last almost 3 decades to try and conserve these embattled birds. And they really are in trouble across the continent. And I think we'll touch on that just now. Okay, so that's a little short introduction. I would like to now hand over to my good friend and colleague, Dr. Chris Lotz. And Chris is currently at Norwich in the UK, and he'll be joining us all the way from Norwich. So Chris, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so thanks a lot for this opportunity, and it's great to see the good attendance, as Mark said. Yeah, so this gold-billed saltator, I was lucky enough to photograph it a couple of years back in Argentina. It's just one of 11,147 bird species recognized by BirdLife International. So pretty incredible number of species that inhabits this earth that we live on. And yeah, it was wonderful just seeing the saltator sitting on top of this cactus and singing away. And yeah, I mean, birds truly do make the world a much better place to live in, just because they're so beautiful, not only in terms of their coloration, but also because they fill the world with bird song. So yeah, I actually gave up my academic research career quite some years back, just to try and sort of see some of the, like as many as possible, in fact, of the world's birds, of these 11,000 species that inhabit the earth. So I basically started a tour company, Birding Eco Tours, that would sort of help get me to all the corners of the earth in search of so many species, basically. So I'm about halfway through. So in terms of seeing about, the 11,000 odd species that the planet has. And probably the biggest highlight of my whole birding career was actually seeing the birds of paradise. So the trip to New Guinea that I did is probably the best thing that I've ever done. I honestly think they're the most beautiful birds in the world. And then, yeah, moving to the next slide, if you don't mind, thanks to Mark. Yeah, one of the other big highlights for me was actually getting to the last continent that I needed, Antarctica. And several of us were privileged enough when we did the cruise to the Antarctic Peninsula to actually sort of get onto this huge piece of sea ice. And there was like this funny cave in the sea ice. And I peered into it and I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw these sort of beady dark eyes peering back at me. It was actually a snow petrel. So one of the best birds, one of the birds that I've been dreaming about seeing like all my life, basically. So yeah, so it's just amazing how birds have got even to the most remote parts of this world. Like, for example, the snow petrel, and of course all the penguins that inhabit Antarctica. And yeah, so then we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Mark. And then, yeah, onto a different part of the world, North America. North America is full of these wood warblers. It's a whole family of birds. There's over 50 of them that are just so brightly colored. And I bet that these wood warblers have got many people into birding, basically. So, and then, yeah, just going on to the next slide of a hummingbird. I actually studied hummingbirds back when I was doing a postdoc. So there's almost 400 species of them. And the amazing thing about them is that there's actually over 100 genera of hummingbirds. So it basically means that it's a very diverse group or family. Strange enough, closely related to swifts, which a lot of people don't realize. And yeah, so this particular hummingbird is a velvet purple coronet that my colleague Andy photographed in South America. And then, yeah, just we can keep this slide on, but yeah, I'd just like to say a few words about South Africa and its birds. If you've got a sort of well-designed 3-week birding trip through South Africa, you can actually see over 500 bird species. And then a lot of those will be endemic and found nowhere else in the world. So the total triplet, or the total list of birds in South Africa is about, well, it's exactly 870 species, 8 of which are only found on the Prince Edward Islands, which includes Marion Island. So yeah, so basically there's a wonderful opportunity to actually go to Marion Island, which is the flock to Marion that BirdLife South Africa is arranging. And yeah, I think my time's up, so I probably should end this very small talk. And yeah, thanks a lot again for joining, and very nice to see the great attendance. So thanks very much, and cheers for now.
Thanks very much, Chris. We really appreciate that. And I think, you know, what brings us all together, including Chris, is we all love birds. I think that's what unites us as birders and as bird conservationists and ornithologists. We love birds. Chris is also chairman of BirdLife South Africa's list committee. Every year we produce a new bird list in which we update the taxonomy and the red list statuses of the birds as well. And Chris and his team are responsible for that. Okay, so moving on with the talk. I mean, how are the world's birds doing? Actually not that well. And how do we know? Every 4 or 5 years, BirdLife International produces a really incredible report called State of the World's Birds. And this has been produced over a number of years. The first edition was in 2004, and you can see the cover there. Those 2 ladies on the left at the top is Patricia Zarita. She's the chief executive of BirdLife International. She's an Ecuadorian. And there's Margaret Atwood, the famous author, bottom left. She's very involved in BirdLife. That was the 2004 State of the World's Birds report. The next one was produced 4 years later, 2008, and then again in 2013. And then the most recent one is the one that was produced in 2018. And these are generally launched at every BirdLife International World Congress, which takes place generally every 4 or 5 years. Now, if you look into these books, these reports, there's a whole lot of detail that goes into them. And the team of scientists, particularly those based in Cambridge, spent a lot of time reviewing the statuses of the world's birds, you know, looking at the population trends, number of threats. Because these reports are repeated, one can start looking at how the birds are doing over time. It's not no longer just a snapshot, but it's actually looking at trends over time. So joining us to tell us a little bit more about some of this work is my colleague, Jim Lawrence, who's based in the UK. He lives in Kings Lynn, and not far from Chris, in fact. And he's the global marketing manager at BirdLife International. Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and good evening to everybody who's listening in today. I understand the weather conditions where you are haven't been brilliant, and you've been in autumn storms. I'm lucky to be here this evening on a very calm spring evening in the UK, and we're right in the middle of the spring migration, which is a wonderful and inspiring time for us, apart from lockdown. We're lucky in the UK that we're not quite as severely locked down as you. We're allowed to take an hour's exercise each day. So I've been being as creative as I possibly can in how to use that and get out and see the local birds and the new visitors coming through. Things like barn swallows are an absolute delight, and seen a few other interesting warblers that have all spent their winters in your continent, of course. So thanks for loaning them back to us for the breeding season. Mark, shall we go to my first slide at this point, or would you like me to say a little bit more about my background at BirdLife? I'll just say, before I joined BirdLife in 2007, I spent 30 years in advertising and marketing, working for Ogilvy, one of the world's largest advertising agencies, and I was lucky enough to join BirdLife because I wanted to really help BirdLife go a little bit further than it had before, and I joined to do one particular thing, which was launch the BirdLife Preventing Extinctions program, which is the area of our work that deals with species, and it's the area that I'll talk a little bit now and just touch on some of the solid science that Mark referred to at the beginning. So let's go to that first slide now. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, I'm going to get there in a moment.
Or Melissa, whoever's pressing the buttons.
There we go. There we go.
Okay, so as Mark said, we are constantly reviewing the state of the world's birds, and he referred to that very, very good publication, State of the World's Birds, Taking the Pulse of the Planet. If you go to the BirdLife website and type in State of the World's Birds in the search engine, you'll be able to get a downloadable copy of that. I'll just talk to you then a little bit about our red listing work, as we call it. BirdLife is the IUCN Red List Authority for birds, and we conduct an ongoing piece of scientific research. We are aggregating data from the 215 partners around the world on a continual basis, and we're particularly interested in understanding the exact situation for all the world's birds. Now, some of the numbers in these slides, indeed, that are in front of you now, have been superseded by the latest. So even following what Chris said earlier, I'll give you the very latest numbers. So we're looking at, let's see now, just shy of 11,000 species in the world. Of those, today, 225 are considered critically endangered. You have 5 of those in South Africa. 461 are considered endangered, the next level of threat, and you've got 22 of those in South Africa. 800 are considered vulnerable, and you have 27 of those in South Africa. So altogether, that makes up 13% of the world's bird species, or if you like to look at it another way, 1 in 8 birds are globally threatened. And the critically endangered, endangered and vulnerable set are those which we call globally threatened with extinction. And it's those birds that are the focus of the BirdLife Preventing Extinctions program. The other 3 categories, near threatened, are those that we are keeping a watch on, and our species work at one end of a spectrum is preventing extinctions, and the other it's keeping common birds common. And so we look to do those things, and the only way that we're able to do that is to understand very clearly what the numbers are behind them. And we not only know the threat levels for each of these birds, we also know the major threats that they face. And so we're able to take action for them by addressing those. The final set, I'm pleased to be able to say, the 77% you can see on the screen are the least concerned species, but we have to keep an eye on those, and populations do go up and down, and threat levels change as well. That final category, data deficient, the less than 1% of species in the world are just those where it is extremely difficult to get information for them. But we are trying to reduce that percentage each year so that we know exactly what's going on. The BirdLife Preventing Extinctions program then uses this data set, and the principle of it is that we know that through targeted conservation action, we're able to address those threats that these species face, and put together a portfolio of action to channel funding to what we call BirdLife species guardians, so the experts that look after a particular bird. For example, BirdLife South Africa acts in that role for the critically endangered white-winged flufftail, which we are now supporting through the Preventing Extinctions program, with some of our donors supporting that work. The principle of targeted conservation actions actually saved 25 species in the last 20 years from inevitable extinction. And we use that principle, and we will continue to do so to prevent extinction. Let's go to the next slide. Thanks, Mark. With all this data, we're actually able to keep a good watch on particular families of birds. Mark's favourite, the old world vultures, as you're probably all very well aware, are in serious decline. In fact, the old world vultures are sitting at the very top of the priorities within the BirdLife Preventing Extinctions program, alongside the Asia bird trade. And bird trade in Asia is a very great concern for us. And of course, animal trade is what we're all facing right now, why we're all sitting in our homes in lockdown as the origin of the COVID-19 virus. So those two groups are our highest priorities. Most of you know that the issue with old world vultures, and forgive me, Mark, if you're going to come on to talk about this, but it's about human persecution in various different forms in various different parts of Africa. But in Asia, the vulture crisis that started some time back now was as a result of a veterinary, a drug called diclofenac. Many of you will know about this as well, which was moved from human use to veterinary use and was found to cause liver failures in vultures. The numbers were that there was a 99.9% decline in 3 species of vulture in the Indian subcontinent as a result of that drug entering the system. The BirdLife Partnership rallied. All partners got together and were able to, under one banner, lobby the Indian government to take action, which was highly successful. And we managed to get diclofenac banned as a veterinary medicine as a result of the partnership coming together and speaking with one voice. Bustards are another group. There's a couple of bustards that we're working on, well, 3 bustards that we're working on, particularly in India at the moment, are of grave concern. The Great Indian Bustard probably has fewer than 150 left of them, so they are in decline. And the other 2 species we're working on in that part of the world are the lesser florican and Bengal florican, and all of those species are benefiting from the support of BirdLife Species Champions, the donors who support our work to fund direct conservation action that the species guardians are then working on. So our data enables us to look at groups of birds as well, and historically you'll probably all be very familiar that 2 other big groups of birds have been identified through this work. the albatrosses, where we've made fantastic strides to turn around the fortunes of some of those birds, bringing some of those back from critically endangered, and the others are now the second most threatened group of seabirds, the penguins. And I know you're doing some fantastic work for African penguin, Mark, through BirdLife South Africa here as well. So hats off to you for that. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Do I have another one at this point, or are we?
I'll speak to this, Jim.
Great,
so
please.
Thanks very much for that, and Jim, and we do appreciate all the support you're giving. And it's actually Rock Jumper, the bird tour operator, that's supporting the white-winged flufftail position and funding one of our staff's positions, Carl Lloyd's position. So another figure from the State of the World's Bird Report is this one, and that's a pie diagram showing the different threats. All the threats are related to human actions. The big blue piece of the pie is agriculture, one of the biggest threats, but there's a whole lot of threats that are affecting our birds. So threats are very varied. Many species are impacted by several threats, and many of the threats are interrelated. So very difficult for us to deal with all of these threats. BirdLife South Africa produced its own State of South Africa's Birds Report recently, 2017, so a few years ago. We're very proud of this, this document. And in fact, our head of conservation, Dr. Hanleen Smith-Robinson, and I had an audience with Minister Barbara Creasy last year, and I took her a copy of this book. She paged through it as we spoke, and she said, "Mark, well done." She said, "This is exactly what we need as decision makers and policy makers." So it really is a good report, and something that we will revise in a few years' time as well. And then we can start looking at some of the trends and from the species, how their populations are doing, but also whether any of the threats are changing. So moving on, science guides the work that BirdLife does. One has to be objective and scientific in how you make your decisions. And also because there aren't endless resources, you need to make sure that you're channeling the funding that you have into the areas where it is needed most. And I included this slide, and this was taken last year at Kirstenbosch after a meeting we had at the South African National Biodiversity Institute. And the fellow in the wheelchair is Dr. Stuart Butchart, and he's the chief scientist at BirdLife International. He's a very, very clever man, and a lot of the science that's done at BirdLife International is under his leadership. On his right behind him is Mel Heath, she's the head of policy at BirdLife, and there's Ernst Retief and I. Jim did mention the red listing. BirdLife International is the red list authority for birds, and regular reviews are taken to see how the birds are doing. Of course, that's important information. If we're putting effort into conservation action, we need to know that birds populations are increasing, their ranges are expanding, and they can be downlisted. When they're going the other way, populations are declining, they're uplisted, we know we need to increase our efforts. BirdLife South Africa is involved in producing the regional red data book, and in fact, there's been 4 regional red data books produced over the last few decades, and these are the 2 most recent ones. The most recent one being that 2015 Eskom Red Data Book of Birds, a massive undertaking done by BirdLife South Africa staff, and a publication that we hope to review pretty soon, and also made available on our website. So it'll become a dynamic document and can be, the statuses of the birds can be reviewed regularly. Of course, one can address the threats, and Jim has mentioned many of the threats that our birds face, but one has to also look after their habitats, and particularly the sites that they occupy. So one of BirdLife International's focal areas over quite a few decades has been looking after these important bird and biodiversity areas. And those are the green areas on the mainlands, and the blue areas over the oceans, which are recognized as IBAs. And this is in fact the largest and most comprehensive site network for nature conservation on the planet. And there are many, many IBAs. In fact, there's over 13,000 IBAs that have been identified. They cover 26 million hectares. They cover 7.4% of our terrestrial surface and 6.4% of the marine surface. So they're very, very extensive. People would think 13,000 IBAs have been identified. That's not a massive undertaking. Identifying just a single IBA is a lot of work. I know, because the original South African Red Data IBA directory, Keith Barnes and I sat around a table for a long time looking at the Northern Cape. When I worked in the Northern Cape, to try and identify those IBAs, it was no easy feat. Nowadays, we have a lot more information. Through the Southern African Bird Atlas Project, we have better information about the distribution of our birds. It's becoming easier to identify where these important sites are. And Robin Cullen and Ernst Retief, who work in our Science and Innovation program, are responsible for identifying these IBAs and these key biodiversity areas. Many of these IBAs are going to be called key biodiversity areas, which is the new sort of global standard for sites which are important for biodiversity conservation. To indicate how seriously BirdLife International takes the IBA network, all you need to worry about is those two little histograms in the middle of that figure. In 1993, 23% of the IBAs in the European Union were designated as special protected areas. BirdLife International and the partners in Europe put a lot of effort in. In 2016, 70% of those IBAs were designated as protected areas. So a lot of effort was put into ensuring that those very important sites across Europe, sites that are important for birds, are protected. We do a lot of work to monitor the IBAs. Target for this year was 4,267 of the IBAs around the world will be monitored. And monitoring is not taking a drive through an IBA and looking at the birds and maybe taking a few photographs. These are often assessments that take several days to complete. A lot of action, conservation action takes place in these IBAs. The target this year was to ensure that IBAs benefited from action in more than 3,000, or at least 3,000 of the IBAs. And this is some really important work. You can identify the sites, but unless you go and actually try and change the fortunes, the threats in those IBAs, you're not going to ensure that they're conserved. We have a fair number of IBAs in our country, and that map there shows the red areas, which are 113 IBAs that have been identified in South Africa. Some of them are already conserved, and you will see Kgalagadi Transfrontier Park, Kruger National Park being two well-known, very well-protected conservation areas, but many of them are unprotected. And the emphasis that BirdLife South Africa's placed in the last few years is to ensure that the unprotected IBAs received protection. And this is working with the landowners using something called biodiversity stewardship to encourage the landowners to commit these important sites to conservation. And the blue areas, the blue circles show where we've been prioritizing our action over the last few years. Firstly, in the east, the grassland IBAs, and then secondly, in the west, and those are the estuary IBAs. And Dr. Giselle Murison, he's doing outstanding work in the estuary IBAs, and we have a whole team of people, Ernst Retief, Karina Kutser, and others working on the IBAs in the grassland. We've been successful in encouraging landowners, and this is through often changes in title deeds to conserve those grassland IBAs. And the landowners who commit to conserve these important bird areas can also benefit from taxable and fiscal incentives that we've been working with South African Revenue Service and Treasury to unlock and ensure that there are also, in addition to the biodiversity benefits, the landowners can also derive some financial benefit. As I mentioned earlier, BirdLife is very strategic, very objective and scientific in the way it undertakes its work. And BirdLife has to be so because there are limited resources and there's a lot to do. So we employ a team of scientists. Many of our staff have PhDs and master's degrees and are well-trained. And we also work closely with universities, particularly the Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology, to try and determine where our efforts should be best invested. Every few years, BirdLife International develops a strategy, and this is done in collaboration with the partners around the world. The current strategy, which will be reviewed well, a revision will be presented and probably accepted at the BirdLife World Congress in 2022, in 2 years' time. There's four main pillars, and this is around conserving the species, the sites and habitats, ensuring sustainability, that's really, and then working with people. So there's the strategy. Within that, those four pillars in the strategy, there are 9 global programs, and you'll see right at the top, Preventing Extinction Program, the one that Jim mentioned earlier, and then going to the right, important bird and biodiversity areas. So BirdLife South Africa has a strategic framework that is developed and revised every year. We commit ourselves to achieving a number of targets, and this is all developed under this really important global strategy, which we undertake as a BirdLife partner to implement in our respective countries. I said earlier that the birds link the world, and they do, because there are these migratory routes that birds undertake, these important flyways. The one in yellow is becoming increasingly important to us, and that's called the East Atlantic flyway. And you can see it there, the green area. A lot of the birds from Western Europe and from the UK during the southern summer moved down into West Africa and as far down into Southern Africa. So we're about to appoint the East Atlantic Flyway Initiative Project Manager, funding from the RSPB, who will be working very closely with the countries along this flyway to try and identify the sites that are important for these migratory birds, but also to ensure that they are adequately protected. So BirdLife does a lot of work, but importantly, BirdLife makes things happen. I'm going to give one example here of where things have really happened and happened really well. 17 years ago, some work was done and found that albatrosses were doing really badly. 19 of the 22 species that were recognized at that stage were threatened. And one of the major threats was fisheries. 100,000 albatrosses were thought to be killed by the longline fishery, the tuna fishery, every year. And thousands were killed by trawlers. It was determined that bycatch, this is the inadvertent mortalities during fishing operations, was the second biggest threat to marine birds, and the first being alien animals on islands in particular, which I'll mention in a moment. So the following year, and in 2004, BirdLife created the Albatross Task Force. And you can see Prince Charles, who's been very involved in BirdLife's work over the years, and very proudly involved with the Albatross Task Force. And he mentions it frequently. And in fact, there was a presentation he made, I think it was in South America a few years ago, when I listened to a recording of that presentation. I was very proud to hear him mention the work that BirdLife South Africa does. So this Albatross Task Force brought the partners together. You can see that map there shows particularly South America and South Africa, Namibia, the partners that were important initially, where it was found that the fisheries were having a big impact on seabirds. Fortunately, through the initial work that was done by the Albatross Task Force that was set up, the first one being in South Africa, it was found that the solutions were very simple and also very effective. And to keep albatrosses away from the nets or the fishing trawlers, it was really easy. Drag what you call a Tory line behind the fishing vessel, just dragging 2 traffic cones, and from that hang streamers. And the birds, albatrosses, won't fly into that area. They feel that is a disturbance, and they won't fly into that area. And this has been very effective in reducing the mortality, so I'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm very proud to say that this is a group of people in South Africa that manufacture the Tory line. It's a group of disabled people. They live in a place called Ocean View, not far from Cape Town. It's called the Ocean View Association for Persons with Disabilities. Grand Merchant Bank provides some of the funding that supports them. But they manufacture these Tory lines, and BirdLife South Africa then distributes them to the fisheries, I&J, Oceana, and other fisheries. BirdLife has also worked with the tech industry to try and find solutions, and that's a picture of a hook pod. The hook pod is a device in which the baited hook is inserted. This is in the longline fishery, and when the hook pod drops to a depth of about 10 meters with a pressure change, the hook pod opens, releases the baited hook, so the baited hook is then obviously not accessible to the albatrosses. There's been great success in the longline fishery, where the mitigation measures have been implemented. The reduction in mortalities has been by as much as 90%. Even better in the trawl fishery, and I know the detail in this image won't be that clear, but in 2006, you can see on the left, in 2006, when we started doing our work, we found that just in our trawl fishery in South Africa's waters, 14,000 albatrosses were being killed a year, 14,000 seabirds, most of which were albatrosses. We implemented the mitigation measures in 2014. We were very pleased to report that less than 100 birds were being killed a year. And this reduced mortality has been sustained over time. That low mortality exists today. We published this work in an international scientific journal. We received a Future for Nature award for this work, and it's been one of our flagship projects that we've been bragging about over the years. The other big threat to seabirds is invasive species, and in particular on islands where we have rodents, mice and rats are some of the most important predators of nesting seabirds on some of these islands. And you can see 2013 to 2015, BirdLife was involved in 34 alien species eradications. The target for the end of this year is 69 alien species eradications. Unfortunately, the coronavirus has affected some of the work that was going to be done. A big operation was planned this year to drop poison bait on Gough Island, which is a British territory. This is a project that was going to be undertaken by the RSPB with assistance and support from BirdLife South Africa and from South African government. But unfortunately won't take place this year. It's been postponed until next year. South Africa has its own island, subantarctic island, Marion Island, and the mice there are wreaking havoc on the seabirds too. Many seabirds are killed every year, and we have a project underway, the initial stages of a project working very closely with the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, and also working with the Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology to understand the problem. And probably in 2022, we will be dropping poison bait over Marion Island to eliminate the mice which are causing huge mortalities of seabirds, nesting seabirds on those islands. Okay, so you can address the threats. You also have to look after the areas where the birds occur. And BirdLife has identified 3,500 marine IBAs that cover 6.4% of the world's oceans. It's a very, very large area. The question often gets asked, how do you identify those areas that are important for birds? BirdLife manages the largest global seabird tracking database in the world. And you can see that those colors, they indicate locations, localities where albatrosses and other seabirds have been tracked. So you'll know that areas of the planet, of the oceans where these birds more regularly frequent, you'll know that these are the most important sites for our seabirds. So the seabird work is really important, and BirdLife South Africa has done admirably in its efforts to conserve albatrosses, petrels, and other seabirds, but also in the work that we've done to conserve the African penguin. I'm not going to be talking about in this presentation, but the African penguin is in dire straits, gone from 1 million odd pairs 100 years ago to about 13,000 pairs today. And through the generous support of the Shalf and Amava Trust and the Isdell family, we're undertaking work to ensure that the threats to the African penguin are addressed. But we don't only work on seabirds, we work on a range of other species. And these are some fairly common birds that will be familiar to most of you. And we're working on common birds. We also work on a large number of terrestrial birds. And I haven't actually put any slides in to talk about some of the great work that's being done, pioneered by Dr. Hanneline Smith-Robinson and her team. Hanneline, I think, is also listening to this presentation, and Dr. Melissa Howes-Whitecross, who has been organizing this webinar series. So we have a large number of projects, white-winged flufftail being one of our flagship projects, southern bald ibis. We're working on southern banded snake eagles, on many of the larks, particularly the endemic larks, Rudd's and Bwerdes lark, red lark, and others. So lots of work is being undertaken by BirdLife South Africa to address the threats to our terrestrial birds. The biggest constraint we have is the resources to undertake our work. Difficult finding the funding to undertake the work, and I think it's going to be even more difficult in a post-coronavirus world. So we certainly have some challenges. Okay, we're getting towards the end of the presentation, but I'd like to, hand over to Jim Lawrence once again, who's got one more slide that he will speak to.
Yeah, hi Mark. Sorry, I was just muting myself there. So whether it's 222 or 225, we won't quibble. Critically endangered species in the world, we are aiming to reduce that number, and every year we are aiming to downlist a target of 30 birds to a lower category of threat as a result of our action. And that's work that is done by individual BirdLife partners. That, as I said before, there's 115 of those around the world that are doing that work. The critically endangered species remain the highest priority for the BirdLife Preventing Extinctions program, and we are always looking for supporters to help that work. My job is to recruit BirdLife species champions, but it's also to, whenever we're talking to any large audiences, to encourage them to support their national partner, in this case BirdLife South Africa. And if everybody supports the work that BirdLife South Africa is doing to protect its most threatened species, then we can advance things, and we count on communities around the world to do that. Now, this image here is The silhouette that you see on the screen is of a northern bald ibis. This was a bird that was deemed critically endangered for the past 10 or so years, prior to last year, when, after extensive work that we've been doing, enabled us to downlist it. This is a bird which has a wild population now restricted to the Atlantic north coast of Morocco, in the very far north of Africa, and it's at two colonies there that we've been working with our partner called GREPOM, supported by BirdLife in Spain. That's SEO BirdLife, the Spanish partner, who supports GREPOM in their work, and importantly collaborating very closely with the government there. And the government runs the Sus Massa National Park, which protects the last two wild colonies of northern bald ibises in the world. Probably the biggest threat that they had most recently has been persecution and disturbance on their breeding grounds. And these birds nest on cliff faces, sea cliffs. But the work has been increasing. The work with outreach to the local communities has helped invite local fishermen to not disturb the birds on their colonies, and to involve women's groups in collecting the mussels that grow in the estuaries there, and selling those, but doing it in a more sensitive way and not disturbing the birds on their foraging grounds. So with actions like that, we've gradually been able to stop the disturbance, protect the birds better. And 2 years ago, a remarkable discovery was found when a breakaway colony formed of northern bald ibises. And really, as that was great evidence of a population that had steadily increased for the last dozen or so years, and now a new colony was forming, this was really the reasons behind why we were able to downlist that species from critically endangered to endangered. Now, of course, its cousin, the southern bald ibis, which is deemed a vulnerable species, is a bird that BirdLife South Africa is working on and is doing great work for. And it's a happy memory for me that I was able to actually witness a southern bald ibis when I participated in the BirdLife South Africa Rock Jumper Kruger Challenge in February 2018, and I was in the country and travelled to see one of these birds then. So I think we should remember that the birds need help, the birds inspire us, and it's only through the support of people like you that are listening tonight that we're able to do our work. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your support for BirdLife South Africa. Thanks, Mark. Thanks
very much, Jim. Okay, I'm going to move on, and these are just the last few slides. This just shows the distribution of the offices, BirdLife International offices around the world. You can see the big stars with head offices in the UK and Cambridge, and there's regional offices in Africa. We have a regional office in Nairobi and one in Dakar in Senegal. BirdLife is a democratic organization. There's a global council that meets twice a year. We'll be meeting via Zoom in June, 3 consecutive days, 4-hour-long meetings. I'm very proud to currently be represented on the BirdLife Global Council. And that's my colleagues in the BirdLife African Regional Committee meeting. We have our biannual meeting tomorrow, in fact, and you will see my colleagues there from across the continent. And these are incredibly dedicated guys, very well educated, well qualified, very hardworking, that have the responsibility of conserving our continent's birds. The problem is that we don't have much time. We are running out of time. Look at some of the articles recently published in The Guardian: stop biodiversity loss or we could face our own extinction. Biodiversity crisis is worse than climate change, experts say. So, it is, at the moment, there's a lot of doom and gloom. I think coronavirus has made us really think about the future of the planet and biodiversity and what effect we're having. But there is hope. Fortunately, there is hope. And I spoke about some of the successes. The seabird successes have been incredible. We're reversing those, well, addressing those threats and reversing the negative population trends of a number of our seabirds, and particularly some of our albatrosses. There is hope. And the important thing is that we need to act now. The previous generation couldn't do anything about it because we didn't have the threats then. The next generation won't have to do anything about it because it could all be gone by then. It's up to us now to undertake the important work to ensure that birds and other biodiversity and their habitats will be in existence tomorrow. And it's quite a big responsibility for us as a BirdLife partner. I must admit, at the moment, I'm not sleeping very well thinking about responsibilities we have in order to conserve our country's birds. But we have a dedicated team, and we have the support of many people. In fact, the people listening into this webinar are many of the people that do support us. This was going to be a big year for conservation. The Convention of Biodiversity Conference was going to take place in China towards the end of the year. It was going to be an important meeting where a new biodiversity framework was going to be developed and adopted by all of the countries which are party to this agreement. Fortunately, this important meeting has now been postponed till next year. It was going to be attended by at least 20,000 delegates from many of the world's countries. And this biodiversity framework was going to determine really the future for biodiversity on the planet. We've integrally involved in this work. Daniel Monovic, the manager of our regional conservation program, and some of our other staff are very involved with BirdLife International to try and develop some of the ideas and the proposals from BirdLife International to what this framework should look like. What's been encouraging during the last few years is the civil society momentum that we've seen. People like Greta Thunberg, the demonstrations. I think people are now saying, this is our planet. This planet doesn't belong to a few, belongs to all of us. And think about us as future generations. We have to live on this planet, and we need to ensure that it's looked after and that we're not affected in a harmful way. So BirdLife South Africa has important work to do. It's been an absolute honor and privilege for me to be working for BirdLife South Africa for the past 11 years. I've seen the organization grow during this time. We have a really hardworking and dedicated team of staff. We've been working from home, working remotely for almost 4 weeks. The productivity has not decreased. The productivity could have even increased as we work remotely and we held daily Zoom meetings. Passionate people that are determined to ensure that birds will be around for future generations to enjoy. We've lost many birds on the planet, the dodo in Mauritius, the passenger pigeon in North America. It's very pleasing to say that we've never lost a bird species in Africa, not in historical times, but some of them are getting precariously close to the edge of that extinction precipice. I'd like to encourage you all to, and those who aren't supporting BirdLife South Africa, to support us and support the work that we do. There are many ways in which you can support our organization. If you're not a member of BirdLife South Africa, please consider becoming a member. You'll receive 6 issues of our fantastic magazine, African BirdLife. And incidentally, the May, June issue has not yet been printed because our printer, Tandem Print, is not regarded as an essential service. It's ready to go to print, and as soon as they're open again, they will print the magazine. We're very, very proud of our magazine. If you really want to commit a little bit more, you can become a Conservation League donor. We have 165 Conservation League donors. They give us, on top of their membership fee, 2,800 Rand a year, for which we can give a Section 18A certificate, so the contribution can be deducted back from tax. Conservation League donors bring in over 400,000 Rand a year to our organization, and unrestricted funds we can use where it's needed most. If we had 1,000 Conservation League donors, we'd have 2.8 million Rand a year to channel to areas where it's needed most. I just want to end off as well just by saying that we're feeling at the moment for our community bird guides. We've trained over the last 15 years about 250 community bird guides. More than 100 of them are actively guiding today. But the lockdown has affected them. They're not able to generate any income. Tourism has come to a halt. We do sympathize with them. This is, in fact, not one of the community bird guides. This is Lucky Ngwenya, who's employed by BirdLife South Africa, but does work as a guide in the Wakkerstroom area. We, at the moment, trying to raise funding. We've raised a significant amount of funding over the last few days. We'd like to raise a lot more. And we've asked the guides to apply for some of this funding. A number of guides have already applied. So we can help them get through this difficult period. so they have some money to buy groceries and support their families with their immediate needs. So there's many ways in which you can assist us. You can become a member, you can give gift membership. There's probably no better membership to give to somebody than a gift membership. It's a green gift. People remember your generosity 6 times the following year when they receive the African BirdLife magazine. You can get a My School card. Every time you swipe your card at Woolworths and other stores, a proportion of what you spent will go to BirdLife South Africa at no cost to you. If you're that way inclined, think about leaving a donation to BirdLife South Africa in your will. Our legacy program, I believe, will become very important for the organization in future. And also get to know about Bird of the Year. This year's Bird of the Year is the Southern Ground Hornbill. We're selling our little fluffies, and when the office opens again, you can purchase them at our shop. You can get the poster, you can read the lesson plans on our website and try and help people, encourage people to become more aware about every year's Bird of the Year. Really importantly, tell people about BirdLife South Africa. Spread the word. Tell them about the good work they're doing. Encourage them to support us, to visit our website and learn more about what we're doing. So that ends the first of our conservation conversations and webinars. I'd like to thank you all for joining. We've had a really incredible participation, attendance. Thank you for that. Thanks again to our 2 guests, Melissa, for organizing this webinar. And I will then hand over to Melissa to say the last few words.
Great, thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, everyone. Thank you to those of you who've typed up your questions into the Q&A block. We're going to address some of those now. So I see some of you are already heading out to hopefully go and grab some dinner. You'll see a little survey popping up in your webinar or your web browser. Please take 2 minutes just to give us some feedback on this webinar. We obviously want them to be as successful as possible, and we'd really appreciate your comments on that as you exit the webinar. But for those of you sticking around, Mark, we've got a whole lot of questions here for you to address. If anybody is watching through Facebook, please feel free to also comment your questions into the comment feed on the live video, and we'll try and get to those too. But starting off with Esther Appleyard's question, Mark, she's asking, at what stage or criteria does a species change into critically endangered? And how do we move from endangered to critically endangered or vice versa? And I'm sure Jim can probably answer this too.
Let's give that to Jim to answer.
Hi, I'm sorry I missed who'd asked the question, but it's a very it's a good one and a complex answer. The algorithms that are used by the IUCN are applied across all different taxa, so not just birds, mammals, reptiles, fish, etc. In the case of the Asian vultures, for example, the categorization that brought those birds into the critically endangered arena from the lower threat level was a precipitous decline, a very, very steep decline rate. It could also be that a bird moves into that category because of the absolute number of those birds in the world. If there are less than 250 species, 250 adults of the bird species, then that would bring it into the critically endangered category as well. So really, it's those sorts of things that will lead to the categorization. But all the time through rare bird forums that BirdLife runs with ornithologists and amateur ornithologists around the world, we are conducting research to find out what the latest status of those species are, and then we make those assessment judgments, and we'll move the birds either into a higher category or a lower one as necessary. Hopefully that gives you some of a feel for the criteria.
Great, thanks so much, Jim.
Should I run through some of the others quickly, Melissa? So there's a question from Annette Kinghorn about Indian miners and whether they pose a threat to our birds. To be honest, we're not entirely sure. So we'd like to find out more about the impacts of Indian miners and common starlings and other non-indigenous birds on some of our indigenous birds, and that is some work that's underway. They do compete for nest sites, so work is being done. The trouble is the Indian miner or the common miner population is so large that to undertake a control operation or a management operation would be quite onerous and probably literally impossible at the moment. Then there's a question around the dead rodents on Marion Island. So once the what happens once the poison bait is dropped on the island, the mice develop sensitivity to light, and they go underground and they die underground, and the carcasses eventually rot. So it also makes them inaccessible to scavenging birds such as kelp gulls and lesser sheath balls. There was a question from Alan around how can people assist other than with funding. You can do a lot, Alan. You can become a citizen scientist. There's a project called the Southern African Bird Atlas Project. You can get involved. We collect data these days using a wonderful app called BirdLife. You can log your data, your observations using BirdLife. You can also join your local bird club. And the bird clubs have many activities as well, some of them related to conservation. And then there's a question from Marius Wheeler about a BirdLife partner in Namibia. Marius, yes, that's something that's certainly being discussed, and something that we'd like to take up further, particularly with the East Atlantic flyway work that we're going to be doing. There have been a number of discussions over the years. Unfortunately, the organizations that BirdLife International has entered into discussion with have not taken up the suggestion of becoming a BirdLife partner. But I think Namibia is regarded as a high priority country for the establishment of a partner. There was a question around, I don't know if Chris Lotz is still there, about
yes.
bird pollinators, and if the pollinators were not around, what effect that would have. So, Chris, if you're still there.
Well, it would be disastrous. So, yeah, I mean, plant species would actually go extinct if the pollinators were absent. I mean, some of the, well, most plants are either pollinated by insects or birds. So sugar birds actually specialize in proteas. So it would, quite a number of the protea species would be threatened if sugar birds went extinct, either Guernsey's or Cape, for example. So yeah, it would be a complete disaster, really.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. There's a question from Richard Wilkes about getting children involved in environmental education. Yes, it is a focus. We partner with the Wildlife and Environment Society around some of the environmental education work, Richard. One area in which we're doing a lot of environmental education is in the southern Mpumalanga, the greater Wakastrom area. We're working with 55 rural schools. But our Bird of the Year, every year, we developed really amazing lesson plans that can be used by teachers and learners. And those are available on our website. They're also uploaded onto Facebook as and when they become available. So we will, I'd encourage you to have a look at those. If you're interested, you can drop me an email at ceo@birdlife.org.za and I can give you the relevant links. There was a question from Ingrid Corbett about Egyptian geese, whether they're considered vermin. They're not considered vermin, but they are certainly becoming more and more numerous. And I know there's some work has been done in the Western Cape in particular, Ingrid, to determine ways in which the populations can be managed. I think it's quite difficult. We've just created a very favorable environment for Egyptian geese, and they've certainly benefited from that. And we're dealing with the consequences of golf courses and parks and gardens and agriculture. There's a question from Dominique Prinsleur about is BirdLife doing any work on the illegal trapping and slaughter of migratory birds in places like Lebanon? I don't know, Jim, if you want to answer that.
Yes, the answer to that is yes. About 5 years ago, we conducted a major study of the threats to migratory birds in the Mediterranean region. And we assessed that something in the region of 25 million birds are being killed illegally in the countries that surround that, and Lebanon is one of the highest. We're lucky enough to have a very strong Lebanese partner, and Asad Sahal, the CEO of that partner, is part of BirdLife Council, and he has taken a leadership stance in the country on that issue and is doing some great work with government to try and change very, very ingrained cultural issues of hunting. Kids as young as 10 are given a rifle on their birthdays in that part of the world as a sort of coming of age thing. And so there is an enormous amount of work to do, which links back to that point about education. It's often changing the attitudes of children coming through schools that makes the big difference when it comes to wholesale changes to attitudes to persecuting birds and illegal killing, etc.
And Jean has asked whether the webinar will be available after today. Yes, it will be, Jean. It'll be uploaded onto BirdLife's YouTube channel, so it'll be available on YouTube. So I'm sure Melissa will.
Could I just make one more point that goes back a little bit to the pollinator question? One point I'd like to make is that the BirdLife Partnership is a partnership of strong bird conservation organisations, but more than half of them are broad nature conservations. And an important fact relating to the Important Bird Area Programme, the IBA programme that Mark indicated covers 5% of the Earth's surface. And, you know, if we got these places fully protected, we would be able to address the biodiversity crisis. And the reason I can say that with confidence is that there is a 75% overlap between the places in the world where the most threatened birds live and all other threatened taxa. And we address conservation holistically wherever we do it to protect the whole of the environment, not just the birds. But the birds are our lens and the birds are our ambassadors.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, there's one last question, and maybe Jim, you could answer this too. Barbara is asking, does the shooting of migratory birds still take place in Malta? I'm not sure whether they still do this, and is it considered a sport?
Yes, it's considered by those that hunt in Malta as being a sport there. It does continue. We have a very active program again. BirdLife Malta works to address illegal killing there. They work actively with law enforcement and they are able to do it. But the arguments that the shooting fraternity in Malta make is that this is an ancient rite and a cultural part of their heritage. I think we all feel that those days are gone now, but it is a sensitive and difficult area, but we continue to work hard there. But I'm afraid that Malta per capita, only a tiny country with only a small proportion of those 25 million birds a year that are killed, has got a higher proportion than any other country in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of work to be done there. Okay, there's a last question about, excuse my ignorance, having been a birder for many years, is the Egyptian goose indigenous to Southern Africa? Yes, it is indigenous. There's a much more widespread distribution now occurs, I think, just about across the globe. But the numbers have increased. I think they do belong here, but the numbers have increased to levels which are much higher than they were historically, and result causing problems with some crops and irritate golfers and so on. So I think that we've covered all the questions, Melissa, and we've been going for over an hour.
Yes, we have. Thank you, Mark. And I'd just like to say thank you to you, Jim and Chris, for giving up your Tuesday evenings and joining us on our very first conservation conversations. We hope that this will become a weekly slot for everyone to join us and learn a bit more about not just South Africa's birds, but clearly the world's birds as well. And if any of you would like to donate towards tonight's webinar, if you feel that you enjoyed it, please feel free to use the snap scan on the screen there or visit our website. But obviously this is a free webinar, so you are not obliged to do so, but we do welcome any contributions towards BirdLife South Africa's work. I'd just like to thank all of you for joining us. We have another webinar taking place on Friday. This is for our younger bird conservationists and nature enthusiasts. So Christy Garland, our Vakastrum Center Manager, will be giving a talk on the Spring Alive program, which is a wonderful education tool for young people and young conservation enthusiasts, and teaches them all about migrants and migrant conservation across Africa into Europe. So please do check in on our website, BLSA Conversations, to have a look at how to register for that. And if you have younger children who'd like to join us, please do sign them up for this wonderful webinar at 2 o'clock on Friday, 17 April. And then our next Tuesday slot is going to be Christina Hagen, our Pamela Isdell Fellow of Penguin Conservation. Christina has been working very hard over the last couple of years to establish a new breeding colony for the African penguin in the De Hoop Nature Reserve. And this is a fantastic, fantastic talk. I hope that all of you will join us to listen to Christina's hard work next week, Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And so with that, good night to everyone. Please stay safe during this lockdown period, and whatever you do, remember to look up and look outside. There are birds all around us, and we'd like